come all to a beautiful show. It's gonna be awesome and some other stuff. Dee-dee-dee-dee-doo-dee-dee-doo-dee-dee-doo-dee. Some other musical stuff.
This is Special Session for the week ending Friday, January 17th, 2025. I'm your host, Brian Schott, managing editor of Utah Political Watch. On this week's program, the Supreme Court turns away Utah's land grab lawsuit. Salt Lake City unveils a plan to tackle homelessness. What's behind a proposal to break up Salt Lake County? Is it government efficiency or could it be politics? Representative Burgess Owens wants to let Donald Trump grab them by the canal. And get out your conspiracy theory bingo cards. It's chemtrail time on Utah's Capitol Hill. This week's interview is former Democratic Representative Brian King, who announced this week he's running to become the new chair of the Utah Democratic Party. Right now, Utahns aren't buying what Democrats are selling. What's it going to take for that to change? We'll hear King's plan for revitalizing the Utah Democratic Party. If you haven't yet, you can sign up for my newsletter for free at utahpoliticalwatch.news, or if you want to support my work covering Utah politics, you can become a paying subscriber for as little as $5 a month. If you do that, well, you'll have my gratitude, and you'll make more podcasts like this possible. Now that all that's out of the way, let's get to this week's news. But we're sovereign. You could almost hear that cry coming from the legislature and the governor this week when on Monday morning, the Supreme Court of the United States denied or declined to take up Utah's case trying to seize control of about 18.5 million acres of federal land in the state. They were trying to wrestle vast stretches of public wilderness away from federal control. Last year in August, the state went directly to the Supreme Court, asking the justices to take up their claim that it's unconstitutional for the federal government to maintain ownership of these lands without designating what it should be used for. Right now, the Bureau of Land Management manages that land. Utah argued that it's better to let the state manage these lands inside its borders instead of that control coming from Washington, D.C. Critics were saying, well, this is just a land grab by the state, and they want to sell off the lands for development instead of keeping them available for everyone. But on Monday, Utah's motion or request that the Supreme Court take up this case was declined without comment. The ruling says nothing about the merits of Utah's case. Utah can go to a lower court and try to send this through the process. What the state was trying to do is they were trying to jump the line. They were trying to avoid the long litigation process where they would have had to go to federal court and make arguments and then appeal on up the chain. They were trying to go directly to the Supreme Court because there was clearly a calculation that this Supreme Court, this conservative Supreme Court with a 6-3 conservative majority, would be much more open to their arguments, be much more open to their case. Not at all. That's not what happened. So now Utah, if they want to pursue this, and they're probably going to pursue this, now they have to go through the longer process of the courts that could take years. The state was trying to invoke what they call original jurisdiction, and that's where states are able to ask the court to take up a matter as a first instance. For instance, if you would have states arguing about a border or a body of water or a river, who has control over that? States can go directly to the Supreme Court and say, hey, you need to arbitrate this. That's not what was happening here. At least the Supreme Court did not buy that argument, saying that this would be original jurisdiction case. And so now the state has to go through the whole process. The state spent about $1 million so far on a public relations campaign. I'm sure you've seen the ads where they were trying to convince people that their case should be heard or the justices should decide in their favor. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, almost $1 million on this so far. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on outside lawyers as well. The legislature put about $5 million towards this a couple of years ago. And they were targeting these ads not only locally here in the state, but they were putting them on podcasts. They were micro-targeting people in Washington, D.C. There's some really great reporting on this over at Utah News Dispatch. You should check them out. Some really good reporting by Kyle Dunphy over there. He got a hold of the receipts, and they break it down in great detail. But the state was putting a lot of money behind this effort, thinking they could influence the Supreme Court to take up this case. And now that doesn't work. So that's money that, you have to wonder what the return on investment is in this. If Utah decides to pursue this through the regular court process, one of the hurdles they're going to have to go through is that the legislation admitting Utah as a state, the legislation passed by Congress, and the state's constitution makes it clear that Utah has no legal claim on those lands inside its border owned by the federal government. So the state is going to have to somehow argue that these two pieces of legislation, which explicitly say that Utah has no claim to these lands, that should be ignored. You would think that plain language would be enough to dissuade the state. So Utah is clearly going to have to cross that hurdle, but again, we've seen courts and the Supreme Court ignore precedent. We've seen them ignore the plain language of laws or statutes to reach a foregone conclusion. And this is an argument that Utah is going to have to make if they go back through the regular court process, which is probably what's going to happen. It's going to take just a lot longer than Utah thought it was going to be, because they thought that they were going to be able to skip the line, and the Supreme Court said no. Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall unveiled a comprehensive public safety plan earlier this week to address the growing homelessness crisis and public safety concerns in Utah's capital. The mayor's offering city property for a temporary 1,000-bed homeless shelter campus, while the state comes up with a permanent solution. This is supposed to help address a critical shortage of space to house homeless people that sometimes reaches 1,600 beds. The city's also pledging to invest $5 million into affordable housing for the 2026 fiscal year. The plan emphasized increased law enforcement presence, particularly in downtown areas along the Jordan River Trail and in the Ballpark neighborhood. There's also a new community impact division that's going to be launched. That's part of this plan, along with a specialized team targeting gang activity and drug trafficking. Overall crime in Salt Lake City has dropped by about 5% in 2024, but homelessness has become a rather acute problem. It's risen dramatically. It's up 9% since 2022 and almost 40% since 2019. State leaders, Governor Spencer Cox, Senate President Stuart Adams, and House Speaker Mike Schultz responded positively to this proposal. This came out of some criticism that they had, where they warned Salt Lake City to fix the problem or face state intervention. Although they did look at the proposal positively, they have said that the execution is going to be the crucial portion of this, and so they're going to be paying attention to that. The plan will face its first test once the legislature gavels into session next week, because the implementation timelines go over several years, and there's some things that happen immediately, and there's some long-term parts of the plan, some long-term reforms, and we'll see how much money the legislature decides to put towards the problem once they get underway next week. But this is, at least this is the start of something. Lawmakers have specifically complained about how Salt Lake City is managing its homeless problem, addressing the homeless solution, and Mayor Mendenhall submitted this plan to them this week. So it looks like it's a good start, but again, the proof is going to be in the pudding, and it's all going to come down to the execution. Nothing says smaller government like creating more government. A Republican legislator is floating an idea to possibly split up Salt Lake County when it hits 1 million people. State Representative Jordan Tusher has proposed legislation that would allow residents in a county to file a petition and put it on the ballot to split up counties with a population of over 1 million people. Right now, that would only affect Salt Lake County, although Utah County could qualify sometime in the future if the state continues to grow like it's expected to. Now, Tusher is saying that his proposal is not about political divisions. He just wants to make government more efficient and more accountable, because Salt Lake County has a multi-billion-dollar budget. And would a smaller county do a better job serving its residents? Who knows? But you cannot ignore the fact that Salt Lake County, which would again be the only county affected by this bill, is a Democratic stronghold. If you look at what happened in the 2024 election, a majority of the county-wide races in Salt Lake County were won by Democrats. It's been forever since the county mayor has been a Republican. It was Nancy Workman who was the last Republican mayor of the county. It's a very difficult place for Republicans to win, even though they do fairly well in legislative races, but you can't ignore the effect of gerrymandering on that. There are no Democrats in the legislature outside of Salt Lake County. And given all of that, you cannot ignore that Salt Lake County, being a Democratic stronghold, it's one of only 3 counties in the state where Kamala Harris carried the county. You can't ignore the fact that it would be right now the only county impacted by this piece of legislation. So look at it through that lens, even though Representative Tusher says this is about government efficiency, this is about becoming more responsive to the needs of the people. Well, sure, but an added benefit would be that it would break up the political power of Salt Lake County, however small that might be. After some hemming and hawing, Senator John Curtis said this week that he would vote to confirm Pete Hegseth as the Secretary of Defense. Earlier this week, he was asked, before he had made up his mind, and it was during a live event with Politico, in which he said that he's trying to get more information about Hegseth and former Representative Tulsi Gabbard, whom Donald Trump has nominated as Director of National Intelligence. The day after he said that he was looking for more information, Curtis came out with a statement saying that he would vote to confirm Hegseth. In that statement, Curtis made reference, at least obliquely, to some of the allegations of heavy drinking, sexual assault, misogyny, and other controversies that have swirled around Hegseth. He said, quote, "While there are actions from his past that give me pause, I carefully weighed these concerns against his qualifications, leadership style, and commitment to bolstering the world's most respected military. I'm confident Mr. Hegseth shares my vision of ensuring our armed services are prepared to meet the evolving challenges of the 21st century." Now, I know a lot of people, especially on the left, are disappointed with Curtis's comments. And I said the same thing about former Senator Mitt Romney that I've said about Senator Curtis. He is a moderate Republican, and you cannot be surprised when he votes like a Republican, says things like a Republican. It only sets you up for disappointment when you try to map your beliefs onto Republicans just because they seem like a moderate. When Mitt Romney voted to remove Donald Trump from office in his first and second impeachment trials, that was a very brave vote that Romney took, but it didn't signal that he was headed to the barricades, that he was leading the resistance. Romney is a traditional Republican, always has been a traditional Republican, and he voted with Trump the majority of the time. Curtis is going to do the same thing. Curtis is much more moderate than Senator Mike Lee is. Mike Lee is more of an ideologue, and Curtis is a moderate, and that's going to help Curtis be able to get things done in Congress. Lee, for his bombast, really cannot accomplish anything in Congress other than complaining. So again, do not be surprised when Curtis, who is a Republican, acts like a Republican. If you do that, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. So really, it's not surprising that Curtis is supporting Pete Hegseth because he's a Republican senator. You can be disappointed. You can be shocked that he's supporting him given what we know about Hegseth, his qualifications, his background. Those are all legitimate things. But to think that he's ideologically aligned with you just because he seems like a moderate, especially if you are a Democrat or a liberal, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. Sticking with Congress, Utah Republican Representative Burgess Owens has signed on to a pair of bills that further Donald Trump's stated goals of getting control of the Panama Canal and Greenland. He has signed on as a co-sponsor of H.R. 283, which is dubbed the Panama Canal Repurchase Act of 2025. And then he's also signed on as a co-sponsor of H.R. 361, which authorizes the president to seek to enter in negotiations with the Kingdom of Denmark to secure the acquisition of Greenland. To paraphrase Donald Trump and his strategy about this, when you're a star, they let you do it. You can grab them by the peninsula or the canal or whatever. This is sort of a perplexing thing that Trump has latched onto. He sent Don Jr., his son, to Greenland, and you can read a great story in the Wall Street Journal about how that trip was bizarre. And apparently there was a picture of a bunch of people wearing Make America Great Again hats in Greenland, and it's come out that all Don Jr. and Charlie Kirk did is round up a bunch of unhoused people in Greenland, offered them a meal, and made them put on the hat so they could take the picture. Anyway, it's just a really bizarre thing, but Representative Burgess Owens is all in on these efforts. Now, while it's easy to dismiss this, Trump has repeatedly talked about regaining U.S. control of the Panama Canal, Greenland, possibly Canada. In a recent press conference, he refused to rule out using military force against Panama or Greenland in pursuit of those goals. When people say take Trump literally but not seriously, or seriously but not literally, I wouldn't be surprised if this is actually more of an effort than just something that Trump is musing about, and you've got Representative Burgess Owens fully in his corner on both of these. Don't know about the military action to take over either Panama Canal or Greenland. Owens' office hasn't responded to me, which is pretty typical, but at least he signaled that he's on board with this. He's the only members of Utah's congressional delegation who have signed on to these so far. I really should have started a pool about which conspiracy theory was going to sponsor legislation during the upcoming 2025 session first. My money was on vaccines because Representative Trevor Lee has a bill about vaccines, and the newest member of the legislature, Representative Christian Chevrier, who is taking the place of Brady Brammer in the House because Brammer is moving up to the Senate to take the place of former Senator Kennedy, who's now in Congress. Chevrier has been a long-time anti-vaccine advocate, and from what I understand, she's got some pretty kooky legislation about vaccines coming, but I did not see legislation about chemtrails coming up. The conspiracy theories about chemtrails have been around for a long time. When jets are flying overhead, they will sometimes leave trails of water vapor from their engines, and there has been a long-standing conspiracy theory that those plumes of water vapor are actually toxic chemicals that planes are secretly spraying into the sky for any number of nefarious reasons. It could be population control, it could be mood control, whatever. Anyway, it has been a conspiracy theory for a long time. Well, Senator Ronald Winterton of Roosevelt, Republican, on Thursday introduced SB 126, and that blocks, quote, the release of chemicals or substances from an aircraft used in weather geoengineering. Now, that bill does not mention chemtrails, but Winterton told me, yeah, I'm talking about chemtrails here. And again, that is a conspiracy theory that water vapor that's coming from these jet planes is actually toxic chemicals or biological agents being sprayed into the atmosphere. What he told me in a text message is he said vapor trails are different from chemtrails, and that's what we're targeting. And then he went on to say, on days you have blue skies, especially away from the cities, it's very evident what is going on. So he's talking about airplanes that are flying overhead, and you see those trails of water vapor. He thinks that those could be chemicals being sprayed into the air, and he wants to stop that. He wants to stop them from geoengineering, and that is an experimental process. It's mostly a theory right now, where scientists have theorized that if you were to do things like spray sulfur particles into the air, that could cool the planet by reflecting sunlight. It's things to mitigate the effects of climate change. Well, Winterton is like, absolutely not. We do not want to do that at all, because while you could be saying that you're trying to impact the weather, we all know what's happening. I'm paraphrasing here, and he didn't exactly say that, but you have to wonder what his thought process is behind this when he's talking specifically about chemtrails, because this is a conspiracy theory, and it is shaping legislation in Utah. His legislation makes it a third-degree felony to disperse these chemicals for, quote, solar radiation management or weather modification over Utah, but it does make an exception for cloud seeding. And this is weird because when you look at the LA wildfires, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has said that it's possible to use weather manipulation to make it rain. So which is it? Is it good or is it bad to put these chemicals in the air for weather control, which is not a thing? Anyway, this is a bill that's going to be introduced during the 2025 session. And just so you understand, its genesis is a conspiracy theory that's been around for decades. This news item might be a little bittersweet for some of you. I know it is for me, because it might be the last time, at least for a little while, that we have to talk about former Representative Phil Lyman. On Monday, the Supreme Court refused to take up Lyman's appeal that he hopes somehow would throw Governor Spencer Cox out of office and force a new election. And this effectively ends Lyman's months-long campaign to invalidate Governor Spencer Cox's primary victory and force a new election with him as the Republican nominee. Lyman is really having trouble getting over that primary election loss to Cox. In that filing, which was an appeal of a decision by the Utah Supreme Court, he argued that the Republican Party's internal rules should somehow override state election laws. He's specifically targeting SB 54, that law that created the dual track system in Utah that allows candidates to get signatures to qualify for the primary ballot rather than just going through the caucus and convention system. He claims that the law violates the First Amendment right of political parties to choose political nominees. He won at convention. He won more than 60% of the vote at convention, and under Republican Party rules, he is the nominee of the party. But state rules, which have been upheld by the Supreme Court repeatedly, say that there is another path to the ballot. And when they got to the primary election, Lyman was defeated by Cox. Cox won by about 9 percentage points. After that primary defeat, Lyman launched a write-in campaign. He got about 13% of the vote in November's election, and you'll hear his supporters say things like, well, he's got the most write-in votes of any candidate in history. Yeah, He also finished third. He finished third behind Brian King, the Democratic nominee. He finished in third place. So it doesn't matter how many votes you got, or it's the most successful write-in campaign in history. He didn't win. You really can't claim that a write-in campaign is successful unless you win, and he didn't win. He only got about 13% of the vote. I went through the campaign finance disclosures. The year-end reports were issued this week, and Lyman spent more than $2 million on his primary and write-in efforts, which is a lot of money and not a lot to show for it. So maybe this is the end of Phil Lyman's efforts to become the governor of Utah, at least until the 2028 election, or maybe not. I listened in on a podcast he did, and there's apparently a nascent effort afoot among his supporters to ask the legislature to impeach Governor Spencer Cox, calling on Republican legislators for reasons, apparently. You and I both know that that's not going anywhere. Apparently keep hope alive for Phil Lyman and his supporters, but that's probably going to get harder and harder and harder because he just keeps losing. And right now on the show, we are joined by former Representative Brian King, Democrat of Salt Lake City. He announced on Wednesday that he is going to be running for chair of the Utah Democratic Party. Brian, it's nice to have you on board and nice to have a chance to chat with you.
Thanks, Ron. Good to be with you.
Talk about why you want to be the head of the Democratic Party in the state. That's kind of a thankless job.
That's the phrase. That's the word that comes up a lot when I talk to people about it. And it's a difficult job, is what that word means when people say it, and it is, because you're talking about trying to juggle different interests within the party, pressure from outside the party, all sorts of things. But from my perspective, what we're looking at here is a great opportunity for growth and great opportunity to move the party forward in Utah. We've got changing demographics in Utah. We're the youngest state. We're the fastest growing state. Several studies have come out saying that Utah is one of the states in the country that moved furthest in the blue direction compared to other states. I mean, Washington, the state of Washington was up there, and we were like number 2 in terms of how we moved. We resisted the red tide of Donald Trump in the 2024 election. So I think that we've got a lot of factions within the majority party right now that I think make it promising for us to gain ground as Democrats. And look, it's discouraging at times to be a Democrat, especially in parts of Utah that are so overwhelmingly red outside Salt Lake County. But there's no good option. There's no good alternative to putting your spurs on and saddling up and trying to make sure that you accomplish something good for Utahns that reflect Utah values. So that's what we're doing.
I've always sort of squinted when people say that, or bring up the stat that Utah has shifted the most blue. I think that that's kind of a misleading stat, because you're looking at going from the vote for Mitt Romney, who was a favorite son of the state for president, to Donald Trump, who did not get a majority the first time he ran, barely got over 50% the second time he ran. I mean, he's not incredibly popular. So don't you think that that's a little bit of a misleading stat? Because it seems to me like, you're basing it on one of these things is not like the other.
Well, it depends on the stat that you look at. But this most recent one that was done by Steve Kornacki and others shows that Steve Kornacki is the one who I think is you're most likely to see that kind of concern that you just raised levied at. But there are other stats that show, compared to other states in the country, we were resisting the red tide, the red wave, to a greater extent than just about any other state in this last election. And the fact is, we are the fastest growing, and we are the youngest state in the country, and we, I think, have great opportunities to move in the right direction here. We're not going to see the legislature turn over in 2026 and be Democratic. This is incremental. This is movement that we have to see and that we have to work to gain. And as I said, there's really not a good alternative. We've got 4 years of Donald Trump coming up. And one of the reasons I threw my hat in for this race is I couldn't stand the idea of sitting on the sidelines and not having an opportunity to raise concerns to Utah, to articulate why Donald Trump and the things that he's talking about and his followers in Utah who are in leadership positions, whether it's the president of the Senate or the Speaker of the House or the governor, why those are not reflecting Utah values. And I think there are very good arguments to be made as to why Utah is better than the nonsense and the lies that are being peddled by some of the far-right extremists in the Republican Party these days, including the president-elect. So, the stuff that happens at the national level filters down to things in the state. I don't think there's any question about that. And I just want to make sure that the state Democratic Party in Utah has a strong voice in contrast to the kinds of things that we're going to be hearing over the next 2 and 4 years from the National Republican Party, and that will filter down inevitably, as I say, to the leaders of the state Republican Party in the legislature and in the executive branch.
Clearly it's a long term. It's you have to play the long game in order to get Democrats to become more competitive in the state. Right now, Utahns are not buying what you're selling, and there are some factors. I mean, there's some gerrymandering involved in that. But if you look at the statewide elections in a row, I did the math. Republicans have won 54 statewide elections in a row since Jan Graham won Attorney General in 1992. That's the last time Democrats won a statewide race.
Right.
They've really haven't even come close in any of those. So what is it going to take in the short term and in order to, become more competitive in these elections, to get more Utahns at least even open to voting for Democrats? That's a short-term goal. And how do you get your party to start focusing on the long game? Because I often look at what happened in Florida. The Republican Party there was an afterthought for a long time, but they embarked on a long-term plan to make the Republican Party there more competitive. And now the Republican Party in Florida is dominant, and the Democratic Party is almost non-existent there.
Yeah. No, it's a real challenge. And one of the things that Democrats are talking about on a federal level, national level, is the same kind of questions that you're raising. Of course, the national Democrats are not don't have the same track record of living in a supermajority conservative Republican environment in the same way that we do in Utah. But I'll tell you, there are some things that we can and that we need to do. Because sitting on the sidelines and throwing our hands up and just quitting and saying, well, there's nothing we can do, that's never a good option. And I don't think it's a Utah option that the people of the state want to see, or, they want to see a healthy two-party system. We don't have that in Utah right now. We have one-party control. We have a monopoly. And we've got to do a better job of making sure that there's competition between these two parties, because competition and the fact that competition will bring to the fore and to the best ideas will arise out of that competition to benefit Utahns, that's critically important for people. You're not going to get that competition until and unless you have really good Democrats standing up and saying, hey, I have an idea, and it's better than the ideas that the Republicans are peddling right now. So we're going to develop a 5 and a 10 and a 15-year strategic plan to break control of the Republican Party, or the Republican supermajority, that is, in the legislature and in the other statewide offices. We're going to run everywhere. We're going to have Democrats running in every legislative district that we can. Of course, you're not going to be 100% successful on that necessarily, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement. We're going to be unapologetically progressive in our thinking, in our stances, in our articulation of values, because one of the things that Utahns are irritated about is today's Republican Party simply does not reflect the values that our fathers and grandfathers who were Republicans stood for. They don't stand for integrity. They don't stand for basing their policy decision on facts and science. They don't stand on a respect for individual rights and liberty and freedom. They don't trust families. They don't value education. I mean, these are things that Republicans in the past have always stood for. And, we could disagree about the details, but there's so much right now that Republicans have walked away from that are basic core values, not just of the Democrats, but of the Republicans themselves. And I think Utahns are beginning to recognize that. So there's a lot we can do. That you've mentioned redistricting. this is a critically important and promising thing, because I think what we're going to see is a need to redistrict, to come up with new congressional maps by the legislature. That's still being played out in the courts and in the legislature. But in 26, or at the very latest in 28, we're going to see maps that reflect the ability of at least one Democrat, maybe two, to get elected in the state of Utah in a way that the gerrymandered maps in the past have not allowed for. We're working to see the same thing happen with regard to state House and state Senate maps. So that has the prospect of really breaking the hold that the gerrymandered, redistricted maps in the legislature have right now, in a way that allows us to move forward to break supermajority control. So it's the right time for a leader of the Democratic Party to step up and take advantage of these opportunities that exist now. I personally don't think that Utah is going to do particularly well over the next 4 years with Donald Trump. I think that's just a function of his poor policy making. And I mean, you look at who he's putting in his cabinet, and my goodness, well, those are not quality individuals who are likely to lead us in the right direction as a country. And I'm concerned about that for Utah. And so, I want us to do well as a state and as a country. But again, this comes down to opportunities for growth. And I think we've got that right now.
What lessons from your 2024 gubernatorial run can you put forward to helping the Democratic Party become more competitive? What things did you learn during that run that you can apply to this job and say, these are some of the things that we need to do in order to open hearts and minds here in the state to at least listening to your message? Because with a lot of voters right now, it's just a straight no go.
Yeah. No, thank you for the question. It's a great one. We love traveling around the state and visiting with people across Utah, rural, suburban, urban areas, Salt Lake County, every place from Washington County up to Cache County, from San Juan County to Box Elder. I mean, it was just a lot of fun. And listening to people you recognize, they're looking for their elected officials to do things that will positively impact their day-to-day lives. They're not interested in the culture wars. They're not interested in DEI or in transgender issues, because they recognize those are culture wedge issues that are just designed to push hot buttons and make people angry or afraid, or they're used to divide us. They looked at us on the campaign and said, what are you going to do to help me address the problems in my day-to-day life? Help me afford to get into a home. I mean, affordable housing is a huge issue. So the bottom line is, I want to address, as party chair, the kinds of things that Utahns are most concerned about, and to make sure that the candidates that we have running for office here in Utah as Democrats are articulating that message in a way that helps people recognize voting for Democrats is the way that's most likely to result in achieving gains in the areas of individuals' lives in Utah that really matter to them, whether it's helping save for their child to go to college, or getting into a home, or just affording the groceries on a daily and weekly and monthly basis. So that's the kind of thing that I think Utahns want to hear. And I think we need to, in a compare and contrast way, as Democrats, say the Republicans are anxious to divide, to push a bunch of hot button issues that are designed to play on people's fears and anxieties and insecurities and anger. And that's not what Utah needs. And so, my hope is that Utahns respond to that, that they respond to respect for freedom, and that they respond to respect for families, and that we're going to be doing something other than just talk about things that divide us.
This might be an unfair question, but I'm wondering if you think that the 2022 Senate race, in which the party decided not to field a candidate in order to let independent Evan McMillan run as an independent, run without a Democratic opponent, from the outside, it feels like that really opened up a rift inside the party. And as I look at it, it feels like that has not healed, and there's still a lot of anger about it, because it was a bold gambit and it didn't work. And people acknowledge that it might not work, but it didn't work. Is that something that, if you become party chair, is that a wound you're going to have to help heal, or do you think the party is starting to move past that? Again, from the outside, it feels like that's something that really drove a wedge between a number of members of the party, at least internally.
No, again, great question. And sure, at the time, there was a lot of discussion about whether this was a good move. It was a strategic move. I think the willingness to move into an independent realm with Evan McMullin and set aside a great candidate that we had in the person of Cale Weston, who was a hardcore, Democrat. He was a Democrat's Democrat, and it was divisive within the party. It left a lot of hard feelings. I think that we have moved past it in the sense that we're still sorting out and trying to decide the extent to which there's benefit in candidates running in a race as something other than a Democrat, or conversely, running as an unapologetic Democrat. I'm in the latter category. I am an unapologetic Democrat, and I always have been. And it's in part because I don't think you can get very far in Utah or any other state running as an independent without some sort of party structure to support you and help you. And as well as the fact that I think I do truly believe in the values of today's Democratic Party. Utah Democrats are not the same as national Democrats. There are differences, to be sure. And I think that what we want to do is talk about those differences so that Utahns feel that, they have a relationship, they have some resonance with Utah Democrats where some national Democratic issues may alienate them a little bit. But to answer your question, from my perspective as party chair, we're going to see a movement away from the idea that there's something toxic about the Democratic brand and that we can't run as Democrats and win in Utah. I don't believe that. I think Democrats in Utah have had some great candidates in the past. We've got Jenny Wilson as our county mayor doing a fantastic job. We've had Ben McAdams in Congress doing a tremendous job, and as the county mayor himself. Salt Lake County has always valued and understood how important Democrats are, and their platform is. We need to spread that message outside Salt Lake County. Of course, it's true in Summit County too, and in Grand County. So Salt Lake County isn't the only blue county in the state. In fact, it's not the most blue county in the state. But it is something we need to get the message that Democrats really do have values that are more aligned with the values of Utahns outside, across the entire state. We need to do a better job of messaging that and helping people understand that's true and why it's true. And quite honestly, Brian, I think we're going to have an easier time than people think doing that, because you have such blatant examples of abuse of power by the supermajority leaders right now. You've got the Senate president and the Speaker of the House straight out lying to Utahns when it comes to what it means to amend the state constitution, and the Supreme Court of the state saying, yeah, you deceived people, guys. The way you wrote Amendment D was deceptive. And I want people to hear about that and to understand you can't trust the supermajority, because we know power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we see that in spades here in Utah.
Brian King, he is a former representative in the Utah legislature. He's running for chair of the Utah Democratic Party. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.
And that will do it for this week's show. Thank you so much for being a listener. Once again, a reminder, if you feel so inclined, please leave a rating and review on the show wherever you get your podcasts. That helps more people find the program and helps us build our audience. I'd be very appreciative. If there is a topic that you'd like me to tackle or a guest you'd like to hear on the show, you can reach out and let me know. You can email me or find me on Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, Instagram. Send me those suggestions and I'll do my best to make that happen. Sign up for my newsletter. It's free at utahpoliticalwatch.news. Or if you feel like it, if you feel so inclined, if the spirit grabs you, you can become a paying subscriber. And what that does is it makes my journalism possible. It makes podcasts like this possible. It makes reporting possible. And it makes it available for more people. And you can do that for as little as $5 a month. That's at utahpoliticalwatch.news. I would really appreciate it. I know not everybody can swing a subscription right now, but if you can, it will allow me to continue committing acts of journalism. Special Session with Brian Schott is written and produced by me, Brian Schott. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.